Before we descend into the labyrinth of shadows, deceptive loyalties, and the high-stakes poker game of Middle Eastern espionage, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We are exposing the operations that governments deny and the history that remains redacted. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a briefing on the invisible wars that shape our world. Amman, Jordan, late 1969. The city was a powder keg, and the fuse was burning short. The air in the capital didn't smell like jasmine or dust anymore. It smelled of diesel, uncollected refuse, and fear. To the casual observer, life in the Hashemite kingdom seemed to proceed with its usual rhythms. The call to prayer echoing off the limestone hills, the chaotic traffic of the downtown souk. But for Brigadier General Nabil Al-Fayez, looking out from his office window at the military headquarters, the country was dissolving before his eyes. Nabil was a man carved from the old world. At 52, he bore the weathered complexion of a man who had spent his youth in the desert patrols. He was a Bedouin, loyal to the king not just by oath, but by blood and tribal code. But the Jordan he saw now was unrecognizable. The Palestinian militias, the Fedayeen, had established a state within a state. They set up roadblocks, levied taxes, and defied the Jordanian police with impunity. They walked the streets of Amman with Kalashnikovs, treating the king's army with open contempt. Nabil lit a cigarette, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a suppressed volcanic rage. Earlier that morning, his convoy had been stopped at a checkpoint. Not an Israeli checkpoint, but one manned by a teenager in a checkered keffiyeh, wielding a Soviet-made rifle. The boy had sneered at the general, demanding identification. Nabil had reached for his sidearm, but his aide had placed a calming hand on his arm. "Not today, sir. It will start a war." "A war is exactly what we need," Nabil had muttered, but he had complied. The humiliation burned in his gut like swallowed acid. He knew the strategic reality. The radicals wanted to use Jordan as a launchpad for attacks against Israel, drawing return fire that decimated Jordanian villages. But more than that, they wanted the throne. They spoke openly of toppling the reactionary puppet king. Nabil saw the trajectory clearly. Civil war was inevitable, and if the army didn't act, the kingdom would fall. But he felt isolated. The officer corps was fractured. Some sympathized with the militias. Others were too terrified to act. The intelligence from his own services was spotty, filtered through layers of incompetence and fear. He needed clarity. He needed to know what the neighbors to the west, the Israelis, were doing. If the kingdom collapsed into chaos, Israel might invade to create a buffer zone. Or worse, the Syrians might roll their tanks across the northern border to support the radicals. Nabil Al-Fayez was a patriot, but patriotism in 1969 was a complex equation. To save his country, he began to think the unthinkable. He realized that the enemy across the river, the Zionists, feared the radical takeover of Amman just as much as he did. The realization was a cold, hard stone in his stomach. The interests of the Hashemite kingdom and the state of Israel were converging, even if their flags remained at war. He sat at his heavy oak desk and stared at the telephone. He didn't pick it up. He didn't know who to call. But in the world of intelligence, you don't always have to make the call. Sometimes, if your desperation is loud enough, the other side hears it. 400 kilometers away, in a nondescript office building in Tel Aviv, the air conditioning hummed against the oppressive coastal humidity. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale coffee. This was the headquarters of the Mossad, specifically the department responsible for recruiting assets in the Arab world. Avner, a senior case officer, a Katza, flipped through a thick dossier stamped with the highest classification. The name on the tab read, Veered, Rose. It was the target package for General Nabil Al-Fayez. "He's ripe," Avner said, tossing a black and white photograph onto the table. It showed Nabil at a military parade, his face set in a grimace while others smiled. "Look at him. He hates them. He hates the chaos. He's a classic law and order man, a royalist to his bones. He sees his king losing control, and it's eating him alive." Across the table, the department head, a man known simply as Mike, studied the photo. "Hating the radicals doesn't mean he likes us, Avner. He fought in 48. He commanded a tank battalion in 67. The man has fired shells at our boys. He's a true believer. He was a true believer, Avner corrected. Now he's a survivor. We've been monitoring the communications from his sector. He's been sidelined by the politicized officers. He's vocal about the lack of discipline. He's been humiliated at checkpoints. The psychology is textbook. He feels his country is being stolen by interlopers. He's looking for a lever to pull, something to stop the slide. And you think we are that lever? I think we are the only ones who can guarantee the one thing he wants, the survival of the Hashemite throne, Avner said. If the radicals take Amman, Jordan becomes a Soviet proxy. The Syrians move in. Nabil knows this. He's intelligent. He trained at Sandhurst. He thinks strategically, not religiously. The recruitment of a high-ranking enemy general is the holy grail of espionage. It is also the most dangerous game a service can play. If Nabil was feigning his dissatisfaction, if this was a trap, an approach could lead to the exposure of Israeli networks or a diplomatic catastrophe. But the stakes in 1969 were existential. The Eastern Front was threatening to collapse into anarchy. How do you propose to make contact? Mike asked, leaning back. You can't exactly ring him up in Amman. He's traveling to London next month, Avner said, tapping a section of the file. Medical checkup for a recurring back issue, followed by a few days of consultation with British military liaisons. He'll be out of the pressure cooker, relaxed, or as relaxed as a man like him can be. We approach him there. Neutral ground. Soft approach, Mike ordered. Do not spook him. If he smells intelligence, he'll run or he'll shoot. Make it accidental. Make it social. Find the common ground. Avner nodded. He began to mentally assemble his cover. He wouldn't be an Israeli. He would be a European businessman, perhaps dealing in logistics or security consulting, someone who understood the world of order and chaos. He would need to mirror the general's frustrations without stating them. It was a seduction, not of romance, but of the mind. London in autumn was a world away from the dust of Amman. The rain slicked the cobblestones of Mayfair, reflecting the amber glow of the street lamps. General Nabil Al-Fayez sat in the corner of a quiet wood-paneled lounge in his hotel, nursing a glass of scotch. In Amman, alcohol was consumed discreetly. Here, it was a relief, a momentary anesthetic for the tension that knotted his shoulders. He was reading a newspaper, the headlines screaming about student protests and global unrest. It seemed the whole world was losing its mind, abandoning discipline for anarchy. Terrible business, isn't it? Nabil looked up. A man in a well-tailored gray suit had paused near his table. He held a tumbler of whiskey and bore an expression of sympathetic weariness. He looked to be in his 40s, with the indeterminate accent of a well-traveled European. The world is changing, Nabil replied in flawless English, clipped and precise. Changing is a polite word for unraveling, the stranger said with a slight smile. Do you mind? The place is rather full. He gestured to the empty armchair opposite Nabil. Nabil hesitated, his security training kicking in. But he was tired of being alone with his dark thoughts. Please. The stranger introduced himself as Walter, a consultant for maritime shipping based in Hamburg. It was a boring enough cover to be plausible, but substantial enough to explain his presence in a luxury hotel. They exchanged pleasantries about the weather, the service, the decline of British industry. Avner, playing the role of Walter, moved the conversation carefully. He didn't bring up Jordan. He didn't bring up Israel. He talked about order. I was in Paris last year during the riots, Avner said, sipping his drink. It's frightening how quickly the veneer of civilization cracks. You have shipping schedules, contracts, laws, and then suddenly, boys with stones decide they run the streets. It makes it impossible to do honest work. Nabil's eyes narrowed slightly, a spark of recognition. It is not just Europe, it is a contagion. Authority is being eroded everywhere. Indeed, Avner said, leaning in. And the problem is that the governments are too afraid to act. They confuse weakness with tolerance. They let the cancer grow because they are afraid of the surgery. The metaphor landed perfectly. Nabil set his glass down. Surgery is painful. Sometimes the patient dies on the table, but without it, the patient surely dies. Avner countered softly. The tragedy is when good men, men who know how to wield the scalpel, are held back by politicians who only care about the morning headlines. They spoke for 2 hours. They talked about military history, about the necessity of hierarchy, about the burden of command. Avner never asked for information. He never probed for secrets. He simply held up a mirror to Nabil's own internal monologue. He validated the general's anger. By the time they parted ways, Nabil didn't see a stranger. He saw a kindred spirit, a man who understood the language of stability in a chaotic world. "I am here for another 2 days," Avner said as he rose. "If you find yourself bored of the rain, perhaps we could continue this. I find it rare to meet someone who sees the world as it is, not as they wish it to be." Nabil nodded. "Perhaps." As the general went up to his room, he felt lighter. He didn't know that Walter was currently transmitting a coded message to Tel Aviv. Contact established. The subject is hungry for validation. Phase 1 complete. The second meeting was less accidental. They met for lunch at a discreet restaurant in Knightsbridge. The dynamic had shifted. Nabil was more open, his guard lowered by the camaraderie of the previous evening. But Avner knew it was time to pivot. He had to move from philosophy to reality. "You know, Nabil," Avner said, using the general's first name for the first time, "I have friends in the region. They tell me the situation in Amman is precarious. It must be difficult for a man of your standing to watch." Nabil stiffened. "It is complex." "Is it?" Avner challenged gently. "It looks simple from the outside. You have a king who wants to rule, and you have guests who want to become the masters of the house. And you have neighbors watching, waiting for the house to fall." Nabil looked around the restaurant, ensuring they weren't overheard. "My neighbors are the problem. They feed the wolves that attack us." "Some of them, yes," Avner said. "Syria, Iraq. They want the king gone. They want a radical republic on their border. But not all your neighbors want that." Silence hung between them. The implication was heavy. "You speak of the Zionists," Nabil whispered, the word tasting like ash. "I speak of strategic realities," Avner said, his voice low and steady. "Israel has no interest in a radical Palestinian state on its eastern flank. They have no interest in the Syrians sitting on the Jordan River. In this specific moment, in this specific nightmare, their interests align with yours. Stability, the survival of the monarchy." Nabil laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "They are the enemy. They took our land." "History is full of enemies who became allies to survive a greater threat," Avner parried. "Churchill and Stalin. The question isn't about the past, Nabil. It's about next year. Will there be a Kingdom of Jordan next year, or will it be a People's Republic run by the Fedayeen?" Avner reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon or money. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a topographical map, handwritten notations in the margins. "What is this?" Nabil asked. "This," Avner said, sliding it across the tablecloth, "is the location of 3 training camps in the Jordan Valley. Not the ones you know about. The ones the Syrians are setting up secretly to arm the militias against your king. My associates thought you might find it useful." Nabil stared at the paper. It was intelligence. Pure, high-grade intelligence that his own incompetent services had missed. If true, it was a direct threat to his brigade. "Why give me this?" "Because if you clear them out, you help yourself," Avner said. "And you help my associates. It's a transaction, no strings, no money, just mutual survival." Nabil looked at the map, then at the man he knew wasn't named Walter. The veil was lifted. He knew what sat across from him. Mossad. The devil. But looking at the coordinates, seeing the threat to his country laid bare, Nabil realized the devil was the only one offering him a sword. "If I take this," Nabil said, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the decision, "there is no going back." "The bridge is already burning behind you, General," Avner said. "The only question is, do you want to be on the side that falls into the ravine, or the side that stays standing?" Nabil took the map. He slipped it into his pocket. The recruitment was sealed. General Nabil returned to Amman a changed man. He carried the weight of his secret like a physical burden, a lead vest beneath his uniform. The intelligence Avner had provided proved accurate. A week after his return, Nabil ordered a routine maneuver that happened to roll through the coordinates on the map. They found the stockpiles. They found the Syrian advisors. They neutralized the threat quietly, reporting it as a training accident to avoid diplomatic fallout. But the success brought no relief. The situation in Amman was deteriorating faster than anyone predicted. It was early 1970 now. The Fedayeen were no longer just a nuisance. They were the de facto authority. They hijacked planes and landed them in the desert, creating an international spectacle that humiliated the king. They ambushed police convoys. Nabil sat in emergency meetings with the high command, listening to the indecision. The king was hesitant, fearing that unleashing the army would trigger a massacre and turn the Arab world against him. The radical Arab states, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, were pressuring the king to capitulate, to give the militias free rein. One evening, Nabil's personal driver was pulled from the car and beaten by a mob of youths chanting slogans against the monarchy. They burned the vehicle. When Nabil visited the man in the hospital, seeing his swollen face and broken ribs, the last remnants of his hesitation evaporated. He needed a secure line. The dead drop system, Dubak, that Avner had explained in London was too slow. He needed to speak to his handler. He needed to coordinate. He drove himself to a secluded spot near the Dead Sea, a place where the radio signals from across the border were strong. He used the device Avner had given him, a high-frequency burst transmitter disguised as a field radio. Veered to base. Situation critical. Thrown in danger. Need immediate assessment of Syrian armored movements. Are they mobilizing? He waited in the darkness, the saline smell of the heavy sea filling his lungs. The response came 20 minutes later, decoded through a one-time pad. Base to veered. Syrian 5th Division moving to border. Heavy armor. They are waiting for the signal to cross. We are tracking. Nabil slammed his hand against the steering wheel. An invasion. If the Syrians crossed while the army was fighting in the streets of Amman, it was over. Jordan would cease to exist. He realized that his role was no longer just to provide information. He had to be the conduit for a shadow alliance that would save the kingdom from itself. He had to convince the king's inner circle, without revealing his source, that the Israeli flank was secure, so they could turn the army eastward to face the internal threat. The psychological toll of living a double life began to manifest. Nabil slept in fitful bursts. He checked his phone for wiretaps constantly. Every glance from a fellow officer felt like an accusation. But the adrenaline of the secret war kept him functioning. In mid-1970, a message came from the Mossad. They needed a face-to-face meeting. The radio was not enough for what was coming. They proposed a crossing. It was madness. For a Jordanian general to physically cross into Israel was treason of the highest order. If caught, he would be executed by firing squad before the sun came up. But the urgency of the message, critical strategic shift, must discuss options for air support, forced his hand. The location was the Arava Valley, south of the Dead Sea, a desolate moonscape of sand and rock. On a moonless night, Nabil drove a jeep to a designated mile marker. He wore civilian clothes, a keffiyeh wrapped around his face. He flashed his headlights. 3 short pulses. From the darkness on the other side of the border fence, a signal returned. Nabil walked to the wire. A section of the fence had been carefully cut and rolled back. 2 figures emerged from the shadows. One was armed with an Uzi, standing guard. The other was Avner. "You look tired, Nabil," Avner said, gripping the general's hand. "I am living in a nightmare," Nabil replied. "Tell me what you have." They sat on the rocks, technically inside Israeli territory. Avner laid out the reality. Israel had mobilized its air force. If the Syrians invaded Jordan to support the PLO, Israel was prepared to fly sorties to smash the Syrian columns. But they couldn't do it without coordination. They needed the Jordanian army's radio frequencies. They needed to know where Nabil's loyalist forces would be, so they didn't hit them by mistake. "You are asking me to give you the keys to our air defense," Nabil said, horrified. "I am asking you to let us protect your back while you fight the knife at your throat," Avner said. "The Americans are involved. Kissinger is talking to our prime minister. But the tactical details? That has to come from you. The king cannot ask us publicly. You know this. It has to be done in the dark." Nabil looked at the stars above the desert, the same stars shown on Amman and Tel Aviv. It was a singular geography divided by a river of blood. "If I do this," Nabil said, "you must promise me that your planes will not touch a single Jordanian village. You hit the Syrians, you hit the Fedayeen camps in the open, but you do not touch my people. You have my word," Avner said, "and the word of my government. We want the king to win." Nabil reached into his jacket and produced a notebook. It contained the codes, the frequencies, the grid references of the loyalist armored brigades. He handed it over. "If this leaks," Nabil whispered, "I am a dead man." "If this works," Avner said, pocketing the book, "you are the savior of your country, even if no one can ever know." The summer of 1970 was the calm before the hurricane. Armed with the intelligence Nabil provided, the Mossad began a subtle campaign of shaping the battlefield. They didn't just passively observe. They fed information back to Nabil that allowed him to maneuver loyalist units into key positions around Amman and Zarqa. This was the hidden ally dynamic in its purest form. Israel used its superior signals intelligence, Unit 8200, to intercept communications between the radical factions and their patrons in Damascus. They learned of weapon shipments, assassination plots against the king, and planned ambushes. Avner would filter this raw data, sanitize it to remove the Israeli signature, and pass it to Nabil via the burst transmitter. Nabil, in turn, would present this intel to the Jordanian General Staff as human intelligence from loyal tribal sources. His reputation grew. He became known as the general with the best ears in the kingdom. His assessments were treated as gospel. But the collaboration was a razor's edge. One afternoon, a Jordanian intelligence officer, a colonel from the Mukhabarat, came to Nabil's office. "General," the colonel said, his eyes scanning the room, "your sources are remarkably accurate, especially regarding the Syrian electronic order of battle. It is almost too precise, like it comes from a listening post on Mount Hermon." Nabil's heart hammered against his ribs. Mount Hermon was Israeli-held territory. "The Bedouins see everything, Colonel," Nabil said, keeping his voice bored. "They count the antennas on the trucks. They count the wheels on the tanks. Do not underestimate the eyes of the desert." "Perhaps," the colonel said, clearly unconvinced. "But we are initiating an internal security review, just to ensure no foreign signals are polluting our networks." Nabil knew he was being watched. The colonel was a Ba'athist sympathizer, likely looking for a reason to purge royalist officers. Nabil had to be more careful. He messaged Avner. "Heat is rising. Suspicions of external source. Must go dark for 72 hours. Avner's reply was chilling in its pragmatism. "Understood. If the colonel becomes an obstacle to the operation, provide his name. We have a file on his illicit dealings in Beirut. We can burn him." Nabil stared at the message. They were offering to blackmail a fellow Jordanian officer to protect him. It was dirty. It was dishonorable. And he considered it. The moral lines he had drawn in the sand were being erased by the incoming tide of war. September 1970. History would remember it as Black September. The tensions finally snapped. The PFLP, a radical Marxist faction, hijacked 4 international airliners and blew them up at Dawson's Field in Jordan. It was a direct challenge to the king's sovereignty. The world watched, waiting for the monarchy to fall. King Hussein declared martial law. The Jordanian army rolled into the cities. The civil war had begun. Amman became a slaughterhouse. House-to-house fighting raged. But the real threat lay to the north. As Nabil had feared, the Syrian army began to move. Over 200 Syrian tanks, with PLO markings hastily painted on them to disguise the invasion as a liberation force, crossed the border near Ramtha. The Jordanian forces in the north were outnumbered and outgunned. Their Centurion tanks were older. The Syrians had modern Soviet T-55s. Nabil was at the forward command post, watching the grease pencil markers on the map move closer to Irbid. If Irbid fell, the road to Amman was open. The king called for help from the Americans and British, but they were too far away. Nabil retreated to a secure communications bunker. He activated the link to Tel Aviv, veered to base, Syrians have crossed. 5th Division. We cannot hold them alone, requesting the shield. The response from Israel was action, not words. The Israeli Air Force flew low-level demonstration passes over the Syrian columns. They didn't fire, not yet. But the sonic booms shattered the windows in the Syrian tanks. It was a message. We are here. Turn back, or we will incinerate you. Simultaneously, Israel mobilized ground troops to the Golan Heights, threatening the Syrian flank. Damascus panicked. The Syrian defense minister, a man named Hafez al-Assad, who would later rule Syria, ordered his air force to stay grounded, fearing a war with Israel. Without air cover, the Syrian tanks were vulnerable. Nabil relayed the message to his tank commanders. The sky is clear. The Syrians have no air support. Counterattack now. The Jordanian army, bolstered by the knowledge that the Israeli ghosts were guarding the flank, fought with renewed ferocity. They hammered the Syrian armor. The invasion force, realizing they were exposed and isolated, began to retreat. Nabil stood on a ridge overlooking the smoking remnants of a T-55. He watched the Syrian dust cloud receding north. He knew, with absolute certainty, that without the hidden alliance, he would be standing in a conquered country. While the war raged in the north, the internal battle in Amman reached its climax. But within the chaos, the Mukhabarat colonel who had suspected Nabil was making his move. The colonel had found a discrepancy in the communications logs. A transmission signature that didn't match Jordanian equipment had been triangulated near the Dead Sea, the location where Nabil had sent his first SOS. The colonel didn't have proof it was Nabil, but he narrowed it down to the general sector. He summoned Nabil to a security briefing in a basement room of the intelligence ministry. It was a trap. Nabil walked in to find 2 armed guards and the colonel sitting behind a table with a file. "General," the colonel smiled thinly, "we have found the traitor, or at least we are close. Someone has been talking to the Jews." Nabil sat down, keeping his hand near his holster. "Then arrest him." "Why am I here?" "Because the signal originated from your area of operations, and because your intelligence on the Syrians was miraculous." The colonel leaned forward. "I think you are a patriot, Nabil. I think you did what you thought was necessary. But treason is treason. Confess, and perhaps the king will be merciful." Nabil realized the colonel didn't have hard proof, only suspicion. He was fishing. "You speak of treason," Nabil said, his voice cold. "While you sat in this basement, my tanks were stopping the Syrians. While you hunted ghosts, I was saving the throne. If you want to arrest me, do it. But know that the king himself reviews my reports." It was a bluff, a massive, dangerous bluff. But Nabil channeled all his command presence, the arrogance of a frontline general confronting a desk bureaucrat. The colonel hesitated. In the midst of a civil war, arresting a popular combat general on suspicion alone was risky. If he was wrong, his career was over. "We will see," the colonel said. "You are free to go. For now." Nabil walked out of the room, his back wet with sweat. He went straight to his car and signaled Avner. "The dog is barking. He needs to be silenced." 2 days later, the Mossad leaked a dossier to the king's private secretary. It detailed the colonel's secret meetings with radical Palestinian factions in Beirut 2 years prior, including bank transfers. Some of it was real. Some of it was masterfully forged by the Mossad's graphics department. The colonel was arrested for conspiracy and treason. He was executed by firing squad a week later. Nabil watched the announcement on television. He felt a wave of nausea. He had used the enemy to kill a countryman to protect a secret. The moral stain was spreading, but the secret, and the alliance, was safe. By late September, the Jordanian army had the upper hand. The PLO was being pushed out of the cities, driven into the mountains of Ajloun and Jerash. The state within a state was being dismantled. But the final stronghold in the mountains was heavily fortified. The Fedayeen had dug into caves and bunkers. A frontal assault would cost thousands of Jordanian lives. Nabil met with his commanders. They were planning a massive artillery barrage, but they lacked precise targeting data for the cave entrances, which were camouflaged. That night, a courier arrived at Nabil's field HQ. He carried a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside were high-resolution aerial reconnaissance photographs. They were taken from an altitude that Jordanian planes couldn't reach. They were Israeli reconnaissance photos, snapped by a Mirage jet flying high over the border. The photos clearly marked the cave entrances, the supply dumps, and the command bunkers. Nabil handed the photos to his artillery chief. "Our scouts have been busy," he lied. "Here are your targets." The bombardment that followed was surgical. The Fedayeen strongholds were pulverized. The resistance crumbled. The survivors fled toward the Syrian border or surrendered. The civil war was effectively over. The Hashemite kingdom had survived. The PLO was expelled to Lebanon, where they would eventually trigger another war, but that is another story. Nabil stood in the ruins of a PLO command post. He saw posters of Arafat and slogans calling for the liberation of Jerusalem. He felt a profound sense of irony. He, an Arab general, had used Zionist intelligence to crush the Palestinian resistance, ensuring that the Jordanian border with Israel would remain the quietest frontier in the Middle East for decades to come. Months after the war settled in early 1971, Nabil requested one final meeting. He returned to the spot in the Arava Valley. The fence was opened again. Avner was waiting. They didn't sit this time. They stood facing each other. "It is done," Nabil said. "The king is secure. The radicals are gone." "You did well, General," Avner said. "You saved your country." "Did I?" Nabil asked, his voice hollow. "I killed my own people. I conspired with the enemy. I have blood on my hands that will never wash off." "You have the blood of soldiers on your hands," Avner said firmly. "Not the blood of a nation. If you had failed, Jordan would be a graveyard. Look at Syria. Look at what is happening in Lebanon. That is the alternative. You chose order over chaos. That is not a sin." Nabil looked at the Israeli agent. "The operation is over. I cannot continue this. The danger is past. I want to go back to being a soldier, not a spy." Avner nodded. "We expected this. We will close the file. The channel will remain open for emergencies, but we will not contact you. You have earned your peace." Nabil extended his hand. Avner shook it. It was a firm grip, the acknowledgement of two professionals who had walked through fire together. "One day," Nabil said, "perhaps our children will shake hands in the daylight." "Inshallah," Avner replied. Nabil walked back to his jeep. He drove away without looking back. The fence was repaired. The footprints were swept away by the wind. General Nabil Al-Fayez retired from the military in 1978. He lived a quiet life in a villa in West Amman, tending to his rose garden. He was honored as a hero of the 1970 war, a loyalist who had stood firm when the country nearly collapsed. He never spoke of the meetings in London. He never mentioned the radio in the Dead Sea Valley. He never explained how he knew exactly where the Syrian tanks were or where the caves were hidden. The peace treaty between Israel and Jordan was officially signed in 1994 in the same Arava Valley where Nabil had crossed the wire. He watched the ceremony on television. He saw King Hussein shake hands with Yitzhak Rabin. He saw the generals from both sides exchanging pleasantries. To the world, this was a new beginning. But Nabil knew the truth. The peace hadn't been built in 1994. It had been forged in the dark days of 1970 by desperate men making impossible choices. It was built on the betrayal of ideology for the sake of survival. Nabil died in 1999. His funeral was attended by the royal family and the military elite. But at the back of the crowd, unnoticed by the cameras, stood an elderly man in a gray suit. Avner had come to pay his respects. He watched the coffin being lowered into the earth. He thought about the map, the whiskey in London, the fear in the general's eyes. He thought about the hidden alliances that hold the world together while the politicians give speeches. As the ceremony ended, Avner placed a single stone on the wall of the cemetery, a Jewish custom of remembrance, and whispered into the wind, "Shalom, Vered." The story of General Nabil Al-Fayez remains largely redacted in the official archives. But in the intelligence world, it is studied as a masterclass in pragmatism. It teaches that in the Middle East, the enemy of your enemy is not just a friend, he is the only life raft you have left. The alliance remained hidden, but its legacy is written in the stability of the border that separates the two nations to this day. A peace bought with secrets, silence, and the courage of a traitor who was really a patriot.